Opening with a laugh instead of a declaration of war, the broadcast shocked the world. Bypassing every Earth defense in mere seconds, the Xyranthi High Fleet wasn't after our resources. They wanted an audience. Following a live humiliation broadcast to 8 billion people, humanity waited until sunrise to answer with hellfire. It was October 14th, a Tuesday, when the sky stopped belonging to us. There were no warnings from the deep space observatories, no frantic calls from the Hubble or James Webb telescopes. One moment, the orbital tracking systems at NORAD were reporting a quiet exosphere, and the next, a shadow fell over every major capital on Earth. Massive, geometrically impossible ships, shimmering in a liquid metal alloy that defied human physics, materialized in our atmosphere. They didn't descend. They simply appeared, as if they had walked through a door in the fabric of space. Panic swept the globe in minutes. Traffic gridlocked in London. Sirens wailed across Tokyo, and in Washington, D.C., the Secret Service dragged President Arthur Pendleton into the Presidential Emergency Operations Center. But the Xyranthi, as we would soon know them, didn't fire a single weapon. They didn't need to. They understood that true dominance is established not through immediate slaughter, but through the complete, theatrical dismantling of a lesser species' pride. At precisely 1:00 p.m. Eastern Time, every screen on Earth was hijacked. Smartphones, billboards in Times Square, smart TVs, and even the classified encrypted monitors deep within the Pentagon flickered and shifted. The image of a Xyranthi commander appeared. He was tall, clad in a sleek, bioluminescent armor, with pale, angular features that looked almost human, yet chillingly devoid of empathy. "Inhabitants of Sol 3, the commander's voice echoed, perfectly translated into the native language of whoever was listening. "I am High Counselor Valerius of the Xyranthi Enclave. We have watched your primitive stumbling for the last century. We have observed your chemical rockets, your crude nuclear fission, and your petty tribal squabbles over dirt and liquid carbon." In the UN General Assembly, Ambassador Sarah Jenkins stood frozen, watching the massive display screens. The room, packed with diplomats, was dead silent. "You pride yourselves on your technological leaps," Valerius continued, a cruel smirk touching his lips. "To demonstrate the vast gulf between our species, turn your eyes to your orbit." The broadcast split-screened. On the right, a live feed from orbit showed the pride of human engineering, the newly launched SpaceX Mars-class heavy cruiser, a multi-billion-dollar vessel representing the pinnacle of private and public aerospace collaboration. Elon Musk and thousands of engineers had spent a decade bringing it to life. From the Xyranthi flagship over New York, a single, lazy beam of violet light pulsed upward. It didn't explode the SpaceX vessel. It simply unmade it. In a span of 3 seconds, the spacecraft disassembled into its base atomic components, scattering into a harmless, sparkling mist of dust. 8 billion people watched their greatest technological achievement get swatted like a gnat. "Your highest achievements are the equivalent of apes banging rocks in a cave," Valerius mocked, the translation software capturing his utter disdain perfectly. "We bring order to the chaos of the galaxy. You are hereby classified as a Tier 9 servitor species. You will surrender all planetary governance, dismantle your primitive defensive arrays, and provide 80% of your planetary output to the Enclave fleet. In exchange, we will allow you to continue drawing breath on this reserve." The humiliation was methodical. Valerius proceeded to list human historical achievements and mock them. He called the moon landing a brief, pathetic hop, and our internet a crude neural network for lower life forms. Finally, a digital document, the Pact of Ascension, was transmitted to every government server on Earth. You have until your planet rotates to face the local star, dawn, in your crude terminology. Valerius concluded, "Sign the accords. Any nation that refuses will have its capital turned to glass. Any attempt to resist will be met with immediate species-wide sterilization. We leave you to your despair." The screens went black. The ships remained, hanging silently in the sky, casting long, terrifying shadows over a paralyzed world. Humanity had not just been defeated, we had been publicly stripped of our dignity. We were told we were nothing, and for the first few hours, most of the world believed it. By midnight, the bunker beneath the United Nations headquarters in Geneva was suffocating with the stench of fear and stale coffee. The global communications grid had been restored, likely by the aliens themselves, just to let us coordinate our surrender. President Pendleton sat at the head of a massive mahogany table, rubbing his temples. Flanking him were the leaders of the surviving global superpowers. British Prime Minister Richard Hughes sat with his head in his hands, while the French and Chinese delegations engaged in a heated, panicked debate in hushed tones. "We have to sign it," Hughes said, his voice cracking. "Did you see what they did to the orbital platform? They didn't even use a weapon, Arthur. It was an industrial tool. They mined our ship out of existence. Our nuclear arsenal is a joke to them. If we sign, we become cattle," Ambassador Sarah Jenkins fired back. "Tier 9 servitor species, I read the translation of the pact. They plan to use our population as biological filters in their deep space mining colonies. The radiation will kill millions in months." "Better millions than billions," shouted the French defense minister. "We have 6 hours until dawn. We have no fleet, no planetary shields, nothing. If we don't transmit the digital signatures by 6:00 a.m., Paris, London, Washington, and Beijing are gone." The room devolved into chaotic shouting. The greatest leaders of Earth were bickering like cornered rats. The humiliation Valerius had broadcast was working perfectly. It had broken their spirit before a single shot was fired. At the far end of the room, sitting entirely too still in the shadows, was Admiral Gregory Hayes. As the head of U.S. Space Command, he had been relatively quiet, staring at a decrypted datapad. Next to him sat a civilian, James Tyclett, the CEO of Lockheed Martin, who had been quietly flown in from Maryland on a hypersonic jet just hours prior. Pendleton slammed his hand on the table. "Admiral Hayes, you're the military commander of our orbital defense. I need options, and I need them now. Or do I just hand over the keys to the planet?" Hayes slowly stood up. He was a veteran of the resource wars, a man with cold, calculating eyes and a jaw set like granite. He walked to the center of the room, plugging his datapad into the main holo table. "Mr. President, Prime Minister, delegates," Hayes began, his voice dangerously calm. "The Zyranthi made a critical error today. 2, actually." The room quieted down. Hughes scoffed. "And what would those be, Admiral? Did they use the wrong font on our death warrant?" "No," Hayes said, ignoring the sarcasm. "Their first error was assuming that the SpaceX vessel and our chemical rockets are the pinnacle of human engineering. Their second error was broadcasting their psychological profile to the entire planet. They are arrogant. They believe they are untouchable. And because they believe they are untouchable, their ships have no active point defense shields deployed. How could you possibly know that? Jenkins asked. Because we've been pinging them with low-frequency radar for the past 10 hours, James Takelet spoke up, adjusting his glasses. They haven't even bothered to scramble our sensors. They literally do not care that we are looking at them. And what does it matter? The Chinese delegate demanded. We have nothing to hit them with. A nuclear ICBM would take 20 minutes to reach them. They would swat it out of the sky. Hayes smiled. It was a terrifying, feral expression. Delegates, for the last 40 years, the citizens of our respective nations have asked where the missing trillions from the defense budgets have gone. The media blamed corruption. The politicians blamed bureaucratic waste. We let them. Hayes tapped the hollow table. The map of Earth disappeared, replaced by blueprints that made the breath catch in Pendleton's throat. In 1958, Project Orion was conceived, Hayes explained. A spacecraft propelled by directional nuclear explosions. It was officially cancelled in 1963 due to the Partial Test Ban Treaty. That was a lie. We didn't cancel Orion. We took it deep underground, and we didn't just build one. Takelet took over. Gentlemen, beneath the Nevada desert, beneath the Ural Mountains, and under the ice of Antarctica, humanity has spent the last half-century building the Archangel-class orbital dreadnoughts. They do not run on chemical fuel. They run on Kasaba howitzer-directed nuclear-shaped charges. They are crude, they are ugly, and they are incredibly violent. Wait, Pendleton whispered, his face pale. Are you telling me we have a secret space fleet? I am telling you we have a shotgun, Hayes corrected. The Xyranthi ships are parked in low orbit, hovering directly over our silos. They wanted to cast a shadow over our capitals to maximize the psychological terror. They parked at point-blank range. Jenkins leaned forward, her eyes wide. They gave us until dawn to transmit the digital signatures of the treaties. You want to use the transmission as a distraction? Exactly, Hayes said. Valerius wants a show. We will give him one. At 05:59 a.m., we will open the transmission frequencies to the Enclave fleet. We will tell them we are sending the signed Pact of Ascension. But instead of a data packet, Hayes tapped the screen again, showing the massive, heavily armored silos buried beneath the Earth opening up. We will launch 12 Archangel dreadnoughts directly into their underbellies, riding a shockwave of 5 megaton nuclear detonations. Our ships are literally propelled by the very weapons they mocked as firecrackers. We will punch through their hulls before their sensors even register the thermal bloom. The room was silent. The magnitude of the gamble was staggering. If this failed, Earth would be annihilated. They humiliated us, Hayes said softly, looking around the room, making eye contact with every terrified leader. They treated us like dirt. They think humanity's defining trait is our technology. They are wrong. Humanity's defining trait is our sheer, unadulterated spite. We do not kneel. President Pendleton stared at the blueprints, then looked at the clock. It was 1:15 a.m. Get the launch crews ready, Admiral, Pendleton said, his voice steadying. By dawn, every agreement burns. Deep beneath the Nevada desert, in a subterranean cavern carved out during the height of the Cold War, the ground groaned. Site 51, long a smoke screen of UFO conspiracies meant to distract the public, was actually the birthing ground for something far more terrifying than little green men. It was the launch bay for the USS Oppenheimer, the flagship of the Archangel class. General Thomas Kessler stood on the gantry, looking up at the monstrosity of human engineering. The ship wasn't sleek. It had no aerodynamic curves, no glowing blue thrusters, and no polished, hyper-advanced hull. It looked like a brutalist skyscraper, forged from thick slabs of depleted uranium, tungsten, and carbon nanotubes. At its base was a massive pusher plate, heavily coated in an ablative oil and suspended by gargantuan shock absorbers the size of redwood trees. Beside him stood Dr. Richard Shelby, a former chief engineer at Northrop Grumman, who had quietly passed away in a boating accident 10 years prior to focus entirely on the Archangel project. Shelby was trembling, though whether from fear or anticipation, Kessler couldn't tell. The Xyranthi flagship is holding geostationary orbit, exactly 42 miles above our silo doors, Shelby muttered, tapping furiously on a ruggedized tablet. They really are completely arrogant. They haven't moved an inch. They are treating this airspace like a designated parking lot. They think they broke us, Richard, Kessler said, lighting a cigar. Regulations be damned. The world might end in 20 minutes anyway. They think we're cowering in the dark, waiting to sign away our species. The pulse timing has to be flawless, Shelby warned, ignoring the smoke. The Kasaba howitzer charges will detonate at a rate of 1 every 0.8 seconds. The shockwave hits the pusher plate, the dampeners compress, and this 3-million-ton brick gets shoved upward. But because the Xyranthi are so close, the moment we clear the silo, the thermal bloom of our propulsion is going to hit their shields like a continuous stellar flare. Good, Kessler growled. Let them choke on our exhaust. Across the globe, similar conversations were happening in hushed, tense whispers. Beneath the Ural Mountains, Commander Mikhail Volkov was strapping into the command chair of the Grozny. Under the ice of the Antarctic, the European coalition's dreadnought, Austerlitz, was shedding its glacial covering, the ice melting away from the localized heating grids, preparing for launch. 12 ships in total. 12 shotguns aimed squarely at the underbellies of the alien fleet. In the United Nations, bunker in Geneva. The clock ticked mercilessly toward dawn. 05:45 a.m. President Pendleton stood before a camera. The global broadcast feed was primed. The aliens had demanded a live surrender. They wanted to broadcast the absolute capitulation of Earth's leaders to every surviving monitor, phone, and television screen on the planet. Are the payloads armed? Pendleton asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Admiral Hayes nodded grimly. All 12 Archangels report green across the board. The digital payload is also ready. The digital payload was a masterpiece of cyber warfare, cooked up in hours by the brightest minds at the NSA and Cyber Command. The Xyranthi expected the Pact of Ascension to be transmitted with the digital cryptographic signatures of Earth's governments. Humanity was going to give them a massive data packet, all right. But embedded within the billions of lines of junk code simulating the signatures was a brute force feedback loop, a digital localized EMP designed to overwhelm their translation and communication matrix for exactly 10 seconds. 10 seconds of blindness. That was all the Archangels needed. At 05:50 a.m., the Xyranthi broadcast hijacked the screens once again. High Counselor Valerius appeared, bathed in the soft, ethereal light of his command deck. Behind him, the curvature of the Earth was visible, the sun just beginning to peek over the Atlantic Ocean, casting a brilliant orange glow across the cloud tops. The local star approaches the horizon, Valerius stated, his voice dripping with bored condescension. The dawn is here. Primitives of Sol 3, the Enclave awaits your submission. Transmit the pact. Do not delay, or the glassing of your population centers will commence. Pendleton stepped into the camera frame. He looked tired, old, but his eyes were completely devoid of surrender. "Counselor Valerius," Pendleton said slowly, "we have reviewed your pact of ascension, and you have recognized the futility of your existence, yes?" Valerius mocked, reclining slightly in his command throne. "We recognized a few things," Pendleton replied, his voice hardening. "We recognized that you are bullies. We recognized that you rely on intimidation because you are used to species that roll over when you show your teeth." Valerius's expression shifted, the cruel smirk fading into a cold glare. "Insolence will only accelerate your sterilization, human. Send the transmission, now." Pendleton reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a physical printed copy of the Pact of Ascension. He held it up to the camera. With his other hand, he pulled a simple stainless steel Zippo lighter, a relic passed down from his grandfather who served in Vietnam. Flick. The small flame danced in the bunker. Valerius leaned forward, his alien features twisting in confusion. "What is this primitive ritual? What are you doing?" "Transmitting our signature," Pendleton said coldly. He held the flame to the corner of the paper. It caught instantly, the dry parchment turning black, curling inward as the fire consumed the Xyranthes' demands. "Admiral Hayes," Pendleton said, never taking his eyes off the burning paper. "Light 'em up." At exactly 05:59 a.m., Admiral Hayes pressed the execution key. The data packet slammed into the Xyranthe servers. Instantly, Valerius's screen glitched, the feed fracturing into a mosaic of static and corrupted pixels. The alien commander's voice became a distorted shriek of digital noise as the feedback loop overwhelmed their communication arrays. They were deaf and blind. And then, the earth cracked open. If anyone had been standing in the Nevada desert at 05:59 and 30 seconds, they would have been instantly vaporized by a flash brighter than 1,000 suns. The heavy blast doors of Site 51 blew outward, instantly liquefied by the intense heat. Below, the first 5-megaton nuclear charge was ejected from the rear of the Oppenheimer and detonated. The directed energy, a spear of plasma hotter than the core of the sun, slammed into the pusher plate. The ground bucked. A localized magnitude 7.2 earthquake rolled across the American Southwest. Riding a pillar of atomic fire, the 3-million-ton Oppenheimer surged out of the earth. 0.8 seconds later, a second nuke detonated. Then a third. With every deafening boom, the ship accelerated, a brutal, bone-shattering ascent that pushed General Kessler and his crew deep into their acceleration couches. In low orbit, the Xyranthe flagship was still reeling from the cyber attack. Their sensors were saturated, their point defense weapons offline. They expected chemical rockets. They expected slow-moving ICBMs that took minutes to clear the atmosphere. They did not expect humanity to ride a ladder of nuclear explosions directly into their face at Mach 30. The Oppenheimer didn't just fly. It battered its way into space through sheer, violent kinetic force. The thermal bloom of the Orion drive acted as a massive energy weapon. Before the Oppenheimer even physically touched the Xyranthe flagship, the backwash from its nuclear propulsion hit the alien hull. The shimmering liquid metal alloy, designed to deflect lasers and energy weapons, utterly failed to comprehend the brute physical impact of a point-blank thermonuclear shockwave. The bottom of the Xyranthe flagship buckled, superheating and turning to slag. And then the Oppenheimer hit them. The Archangel dreadnoughts were designed with a reinforced, conical tungsten ramming prow. At 42 miles above the Earth, the Oppenheimer slammed directly into the underbelly of Valerius's flagship. The sound of the impact couldn't be heard in the vacuum of space, but the visual was apocalyptic. The alien vessel, nearly 3 miles across, violently shuddered, its sleek geometry shattering as millions of tons of American steel buried itself deep into its internal structure. Across the globe, it was happening in synchronization. Above Moscow, the Grozny punched through a Zyranthi cruiser, ripping it completely in half before its Orion drive detonated again, sending the severed halves spinning into the atmosphere to burn up like meteorites. Over London, the Boudica unleashed a broadside of railgun slugs, shattering the glassy exterior of an alien dreadnought before ramming it. Aboard the Oppenheimer, alarms were screaming. The ship had lodged itself deep into the bowels of the alien flagship, surrounded by sparking wreckage and venting alien atmosphere. General Kessler unbuckled his harness. His vision was swimming, his ribs bruised from the brutal G-forces, but he was grinning like a madman. "Breaching teams!" Kessler roared into the comms. "You have your opening. Show these bastards what Tier 9 servitors can do." The airlocks of the Oppenheimer blew open. Out poured hundreds of United States Marines, clad in heavy, zero-G exosuits, armed with magnetic rifles and explosive breaching charges. They didn't rely on complex energy weapons. They used dense, depleted uranium slugs moving at supersonic speeds. The Zyranthi were completely unprepared for a boarding action. Their security forces, tall and graceful, armed with elegant plasma rifles, rushed to the breach points. But their weapons were designed for precise, honorable combat against peer adversaries. They had never fought humans in enclosed spaces. The Marines tore through them. The kinetic slugs shattered the alien armor, the brutal, unrefined violence of human ballistics overwhelming the Zyranthi's elegant defenses. Within minutes, the corridors of the alien flagship were painted with neon blue Zyranthi blood. High Counselor Valerius stood on his command deck, trembling. His monitors were flashing warnings of hull breaches, catastrophic pressure losses, and complete reactor failures. "How?" he whispered, his perfect translation matrix struggling to process the frantic shouting of his crew. "They are primitives. They used chemical rockets." The massive doors to the command deck suddenly blew inward with a deafening crash. Smoke and debris filled the pristine bridge. Through the smoke stepped General Kessler, his heavy exosuit clanking against the crystalline floor. He was flanked by 6 heavily armed Marines, their visors down, weapons leveled at the surviving alien bridge crew. Kessler walked slowly up to the command throne. Valerius looked up at the human, his alien eyes wide with a terror he had never known. This wasn't supposed to happen. The Enclave didn't lose. Not to dirt-dwelling apes. Kessler reached up and unlatched his helmet, pulling it off to look the High Counselor in the eye. "You made a mistake, Counselor," Kessler said, his voice rough. You destroy your own planet with these weapons," Valerius stammered, pointing a shaking hand at the screens, showing the radioactive plumes still dissipating in Earth's atmosphere. "You ride poison into the sky. You are mad." Kessler chuckled, a dark, dangerous sound. "We've been living with the threat of nuclear annihilation for a century, buddy. We're used to the poison. We thrive in the madness." Kessler tapped a device on his wrist. "Geneva. We have the bridge. Patch him through." Back in the UN bunker, The global broadcast was still live. The feed from Valerius's ship was rerouted to Earth. 8 billion people, who only an hour ago had been weeping in despair, now watched as an American general stood over the kneeling alien commander. President Pendleton reappeared on the split screen. He was holding a glass of scotch, the smouldering ashes of the Pact of Ascension resting in an ashtray on his desk. "Counselor Valerius," Pendleton said, raising his glass, "I believe we have renegotiated the terms of our surrender. Specifically, yours." Valerius looked around his ruined bridge. His invincible fleet was in tatters. The sky outside the viewport was filled with the burning wreckage of Xyranthi ships, mixed with the ugly, brutal silhouettes of humanity's Archangel dreadnoughts. What are you?" Valerius whispered, the sheer psychological shock breaking his mind. "We are humanity," Pendleton said softly, leaning into the microphone. "And you just delivered the greatest technological leap in our history, right to our doorstep. We are going to take your ships, Valerius. We are going to reverse engineer your engines, your armor, and your weapons. And when we figure out how they work, we are coming to the Enclave." The broadcast cut back to the full view of the Earth from orbit. The sun had finally risen, illuminating the debris field. The shadow over the world had been lifted, replaced by the blazing dawn of a terrifying new era. The Xyranthi came to humiliate us. They came to show the galaxy that humanity was nothing but a primitive joke, a species meant to serve. But as the ashes of their demands settled, they learned the hardest lesson the universe had to offer. You can break a human's body. You can bomb their cities. But you never, ever insult their pride. Because when humanity is backed into a corner, they don't surrender. They set the corner on fire, and they burn you down with them. The dawn brought fire, and from the ashes, humanity forged an empire of spite. Did this tale of Earth's brutal counterattack get your adrenaline pumping? If you loved this HFY sci-fi story and want to see humanity take the fight to the Enclave, smash that like button. Share this video with your fellow sci-fi lovers, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more epic stories where humanity proves we do not kneel. See you next time.